Okay, we're back.
We're back.
Indeed. We're up for the second presentation. Gary Kurtz is about to give us his presentation on Robert Woodward's Gardens and Hotel in San Francisco. Interestingly, this is San Francisco in those early days before land was really expensive, just like we've had the one on New York when land was really expensive. So looking forward to that. But just before we start, again, I want to remind you, if you have a question for Gary, please put it in the Zoom section called Q&A and not the chat section. Chat section won't get answered at the end of the time. And let me just put a quick plug in. We can always use funds. So if you feel so inclined and enjoyed the presentations today, feel free to go to ephemerasociety.org, hit the donate button, give us a donation. We'd appreciate it greatly. Thank you very much. Oh, and don't forget, virtual book fair starts this afternoon for only Ephemera Society members. So you get in early to the virtual Ephemera fair. Okay, Gary, take it away. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Okay, thank you. It's a privilege to be connected electronically across the continent this way. But yes, my presentation will be on Robert Bloom Woodward and what he called the Central Park of the Pacific. And he was a wonderful book collector. And that's how I really got interested in him. And here's the old boy. And I just want to say a word about ephemera. In my library school training, what have you, no one talked about ephemera. But when I had my first job at the Huntington Library down in San Marino in Southern California, and my boss took me downstairs and said, here's what you're going to work on. And he opened up this big room and it's just loaded with ephemera. And it included brochures and sheet music and citrus crate labels and all those sorts of things. Ever since then, that was back in 1970, I've been captivated and I'm in love with ephemera. Continue to collect it today. So at the institutions I worked for. So here's Robert B. Woodward, and one of the most famous features of San Francisco.
Gary,
in the
you need to
late.
share your screen, please.
Pardon?
You need to share your screen.
Oh, let's see. Where do I find? Oh, share screen. Oh, where did that? What am I doing wrong now?
Click share screen and then select the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, I guess I had the PowerPoint up on my other screen. Let me, should I get out of that and then?
No, just click share screen at the bottom, and then when you see the white box, you're going to select the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, all righty. Okay, let's go. There. So, should I click on share?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry.
You're fine. Perfect.
Okay.
There you go. You're all set.
All righty. Okay, good. Whew. Sometimes I'm not a historian person, not a mathematician, so it shows up sometimes. So but anyhow, through his imagination, Robert Woodward created one of the great venues in 19th century California, Woodward's Gardens. And he was well known for his generous and caring nature, and he converted his home on downtown San Francisco, and he had 2 acres there, and he converted it into a public garden. And Woodward's goal of making his home, it was make it a place of education, recreation, and amusement. And its comparatively short life of 28 years, the gardens hosted scores of concerts, dances, athletic contests, balloon ascensions, and other events, many of which Woodward made available to schools and charitable organizations free of charge. So he saw himself as a real philanthropist. To be sure, San Francisco had other competing places like Rusk Gardens of Willows, and then just a couple of years later, the founding of Golden Gate Park. But to create and support such a stunning complex required considerable financial resources, and Robert Bloom Woodward's business acumen made this possible. And he ranks as one of the California's pioneer millionaires, and he chose to share his good fortune with the city that made it possible. And let's see if I get, there he is there. And here's San Francisco during the bustling days of the gold rush. It was just crammed with all kinds of people. And by 1847, there was hardly anyone living there. And by 1852, it had tens of thousands of people. And it just was a spectacular place. And a lot of people from the Eastern United States coming to California to make their fortune in the gold fields first came to San Francisco after the long and tedious voyage around Cape Horn. And Woodward himself saw an opportunity, and he heard about California and decided to take advantage of that. And there was an old expression developed back then. It was that they mined the miners, and rather than going off and mining and digging in this cold streams of the Sierra, Woodward decided, I can sell people things. And so he was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and he decided this was a once in a lifetime opportunity. So here he is. He came into San Francisco with its muddy streets, and there were ongoing hungry people wandering around. And so what he decided to do before he left New England was Providence, Rhode Island, actually, was to load up his ship with all kinds of goods to sell. And so again, to mind the miners, he was going to sell them food and also provide provisions for them. But San Francisco at that time too was noted for its many fires, and no doubt some of Woodward's assets went up in flames. San Francisco had 7 fires between 1850 and 1855, and it just did considerable ravage to the city, but people rebuilt all the time. And one thing too, back in that day, things were just created out of very flimsy wood and canvas taken from ships. So, but Woodward saw a need, and he wanted to help these miners that were going as hungry, and then they wandered the streets of the city. So he established a grocery store and a quality restaurant. And then he witnessed, as I said, the enterprise go up in smoke. So he decided to build a hotel, or a caravansary, as it was called back then, called the What Cheer House. And the name What Cheer House reflected his New England upbringing. And that was apparently a common expression back in New England. Rather than saying, how are you, or what's up, it's what cheer. So to this, he added an extensive library and museum. It's there in downtown San Francisco on Sacramento Street. And you can see in the next illustration that it was made out of brick and stone and marble, and was relatively fireproof, but didn't survive, unfortunately, 1906, the earthquake and fire. But it nonetheless became a very popular place. And Woodward also saw a need to, again, accommodate all these people wandering around. So he opened up a restaurant there, and he served up to 4,000 meals a day. But he was also a firm believer in temperance. He did not consume alcohol. And so he wanted to have a very civilized place that would be safe for everybody. So as the What Cheer House flourished, so did Woodward. And now a wealthy proprietor, he reinvested again his profits into his hotel, which would later be moved over to Woodward's Gardens. And while a tired carpenter or stevedore or miner could not belly up to the bar for a shot of whiskey at his hotel, he offered a very different kind of diversion, a free library. Can you imagine that back in that time period? A free library and a museum. These were a first in San Francisco. And Woodward knew that his city was filled with lonely and sometimes uncouth and violent men, and his library and museum offered a safe, wonderful, and stimulating diversion. So extraordinary was this library and museum that one of California's pioneer magazines, Hutchings California Illustrated magazine, featured an article about it and said, Hutchings wrote, "We believe we can say with truth that no library in the state is more extensively and better read than the What Cheer House Library." And here, as you can see, the book plate, and I did find this over at the collection at the Sutro Library, this wonderful book plate. And I also like the little warning there, no talking, sleeping, or smoking allowed. But it had long hours. It's open from 6 a.m. until 10 p.m. And it, again, was a great cultural center for San Francisco during the hubbub of the gold rush. And he also had a museum there, and it was so he filled it with all kinds of artifacts that he collected during his travels, and he was doing well enough economically that he can go on trips and buy all kinds of things. So what I also like about this too is it shows a woman in there, and you can see again, and this was beforehand, was just men only, but he decided he better liberalize his establishment and allow the fair sex in. So it just was an incredible place. And the museum room measured 45 by 14 feet in size. And he said, stated in the local newspaper, all California, and in fact, the whole Pacific coast has been ransacked to obtain curiosities. So he had this huge bookcases and display cases and paintings. And he also went to Italy, and he met an artist by the name of Virgil Williams, and he acquired this bust of California and made it a feature of his museum there too. But this was done by Hiram Powers, but it symbolized the rising strength of the Golden State. And then here's the site of the original What Cheer House in downtown San Francisco, and you can see in the background the Transamerica Pyramid. And here's a site of a historic plaque, and a unique hotel opened in 1852 and destroyed by the fire of 1906. What Cheer House catered to men only, but it permitted no liquor on the premises and housed San Francisco's first free library and first museum. So this was a great cultural center. But so what he did with his profits, he purchased a couple of acres of land south of Market Street in downtown San Francisco and opened up and had a big workforce create this beautiful gardens with all kinds of displays. And it just was an incredible cultural center. And so here's a view of it. And then to get people there as quickly as possible from downtown, he had his own transit system, if you will. He had these balloon cars that brought people from downtown San Francisco into his gardens. And again, there's a plaque commemorating Woodward's Gardens there. And it was an amusement park catering to all taste. It was San Francisco's most popular resort until it closed in 1892. But one thing too about Woodward is that he brought his family from New England, from Providence, Rhode Island, out to San Francisco, but they were worried about how safe this was going to be. So to make them feel comfortable and safe, he purchased a wonderful plot of land up in the Napa Valley, very famous, ironically, for wine country, but he built a huge mansion there called Oak Knoll, and it provided a safe haven for his family. And so they wouldn't have to worry about the hubbub and the noise and everything that was going on in San Francisco, or oftentimes gunfights and other sorts of raucous events. So, but here's the main entrance to his great gardens that he opened in 1866. And on the very top was two statues of Minerva, and flanked by two statues of California grizzly bears. And here's his famous former home there, and where the family lived. But again, his wife and children did not feel safe there. But he lined it with all these feathered birds and other kinds of specimens of aviary. And it was an incredible sight for people at that time period. Again, if you keep in mind in 1848, San Francisco, there's nothing there. And all of a sudden, all of this wonderful cultural center was being developed. And he even added in the front gate too, jawbones of a mammoth whale. So it was a stunning entranceway into his former home and museum now. And he, again, he hired a big crew and they developed this wonderful park there. And again, on the 4 acres of property that he owned. And they had all kinds of diversions, as you can imagine by seeing in this map. It just was an incredible place. And there's the gateway there, and here's the gateway, and then there's a big bust of George Washington, all kinds of other things going on there, and some fountains in the back. And this was a great cultural center up here where a lot of entertainment went on. So, and then he, this is where we get into ephemera. He issued all kinds of programs and to illustrate what was going on, to educate people. And he said, education, recreation, amusement is the aim of his gardens, and called it again, the Eden of the West. And one person he became in touch with was P.T. Barnum's, and he thought that he could gather many artifacts from Barnum and many other people to bring into San Francisco to decorate Woodward's gardens. But he had many curious offerings, such as the next one that I'll show you here is in this letter from a guy by the name of S.H. Baker in Philadelphia said, I have an educated pig, the finest in the country, and I think it would be a great card for you. However, in doing my research, I never found any evidence that Woodward took up Mr. Baker with his offer of this educated pig. So, but here's again, the beautiful landscaping and buildings that he had. Up here on the left is a bandstand, and back here were restaurants and other places to get cold water, not booze. So he was very careful about that. And he built this wonderful glass conservatory for exotic plants. And here's a stereo view inside. It just shows you the tropical plants that he brought into this great greenhouse. So this was just such a great educational center for all people coming to California. And so he also issued catalogs to his art gallery there. And these catalogs today are very rare. And the great prize pieces of ephemera that I've had opportunity to collect for institutions I've worked for. And I wish I owned them myself, but I didn't want to have a conflict of interest there. So anyhow, this was, and Virgil Williams, who was became a well-known California artist, was his curator of the art gallery there. So, and here you can see inside the art gallery, they mounted all kinds of paintings on the walls there, and they had a beautiful frescoed ceiling. And here just happened to be one of the visitors to the art gallery was none other than the photographer Edward J. Muybridge. And some of you may know of Muybridge as the famous for his studies of human beings and animals in motion. And some people would say that he was the founder of the motion picture, that he was the inventor of the motion picture with his showing all kinds of animals in motion. But here he also opened up an aquarium there. It had all kinds of windows so the spectators could look at the Finny tribe, and as he called it, which opened up coincidentally on July 4th, 1873. And had all kinds of tanks there so people could, this is one of the very first aquariums anywhere in the United States. And it included both fresh and saltwater tanks. So we could have a variety of species there. And outside, he offered other kinds of amusements, and he had this rotary boat ride constructed, and it would go round and round, a 360-degree ride. But this was very well received by San Franciscans and other visitors to San Francisco. And he also had a sea lion area too, and as it said here in his brochure, a monster sea lion rules as king of his colony. And by that, it meant whenever it was feeding time, the this big monster sea lion would be the first one to be fed. And it must have been quite a spectator event for people to witness this great example of natural history. And here it shows you a nice Victorian style woman feeding an emu in 1881. So it is wonderful what he is able to do there in a variety of interactive displays, even if you call this that. And here you can see a wonderful view of the pavilion or terrace of the Mammoth Pavilion, an Italian terrace, and just was so well populated. Sometimes 6,000 people a day would be visiting there. And he did have inside, I found this drawing about 25 years ago, is buried in a, how would I say, in a back room. And I had it pulled out. And I said, this is really incredible. And here's a plan for the Mammoth Pavilion, which was a roller skating rink. And it could handle up to 6,000 people at a time, spectators, not roller skaters. But here we go. We got little couple enjoying the roller skating rink there in the pavilions there. So it was a good sport for people. And where is it? I had a quote there. Let's see if I can find it. I got ahead of myself too much. Excuse me. Well, anyhow, they just, this was a place for ladies, and they thought this was a very dignified thing for women to do, was to learn how to roller skate. And he also offered an extensive circulating library, and which included some really rare books, and it's amazing, and as well as books on exploration and what have you. But natural history was its a key area. And here's one of the great treasures in there, Edward Lear's illustrations of the family of parrots. And up here you can see the ownership stamp of Woodward's Gardens, and these still exist today. And this is actually seeing this ownership stamp. That's what really kind of intrigued me about what was Woodward's Gardens, and led path to the conclusion of what you see today, with I'm sharing with you. Here's another great botanical wonder, the selection of hexadrian plants. And this is a beautiful large folio volume. And all of these plates were hand colored because they had no means of printing in color at that time period. So these were great treasures that were at the library of the not only the Wetshire House, but later moved over to Woodward's Gardens. And he had other dazzling attractions, such as this Grizzly bear pit. And all kinds of spectators could come out and see this grizzly climb all the way to the top of this pole. So that must have been a stunning thing for people to see. And here you have other examples of animal life being introduced into Woodward's Gardens. So you see here, growing family of camels. And we had a brand new, or a baby camel born February 1st, 1878. Then he stashed around the gardens. These were stuffed animals, but it gave people something to really think about. And this is a garden treasure, as he called it. And this is, again, a photograph by Edward Muybridge. And just, I can imagine as a little kid encountered this in his walk with his parents through the gardens. But and he also had other kind of strange things there. This Chinese giant and his wife, and Chang Wu Gu, stood 8 feet 3 inches tall. So he would have been a terrific basketball player in today's day and age, and with his beautiful wife, King Fu. So again, Edward Muybridge was the photographer. And but they had balloon ascensions there, and this really attracted a lot of people. And seeing wild animals up close made many a heart beat rapidly. But balloon ascensions actually were nothing new in San Francisco at that time. The very first balloon launching that I've been able to document occurred in 1850. So, but one of the things about San Francisco, if you've ever visited there, particularly in the summertime, it gets very, very windy. So anyhow, the renowned Buisley family put up this aerial hot air balloon, and a huge throng came out on October 5th, 1879, with Professor S.W. Caldgrove, who was a veteran aeronaut, was going to launch the balloon. However, one of the Charles Williams, the director of amusements at the garden, insisted of going along for the ride. However, as Williams Buisley pointed out, says, "Sir, you're very, very fat, and that's too much weight." But anyhow, Williams, being in an important role there at the gardens, insisted on going along. So in October 5th, 1879, the balloon was launched, and a stiff wind came up from the west and blew the balloon into downtown San Francisco, where it hit a telegraph wire, and it severed all the ropes that connected the basket to the balloon. And both passengers fell to the ground, and both died, smacking into the ground of the city. That it was an incredible, incredible event. So we had other sorts of events like sword contests, and here we have a huge audience of 15,000 people came out to watch this, and these two horsemen parried back and forth, and it was not meant to be anything fatal. It's just that they were fully protected with good masks and armor, and they'd go back and forth poking at each other. But this again generated huge crowds of people. And then Woodward was very conscientious about promoting his gardens, and he issued these programs, and he had printed 10,000 of these a week. And again, this was a nonstop promotion, education for all. However, the earthquake and fire of 1906 made these programs nowadays very, very rare. So many of them were destroyed in that cataclysmic event. But they also issued these wonderful catalogs, which I just think is exquisite ephemera. And this was compiled by Ferdinand Gruber, the museum's curator. And then it had this practical warning too: do not smoke in the buildings, do not pick flowers, and most of all, do not tease the animals. So that would cause a little bit too much excitement. But, and then again, he had these balloon or bobtail cars that provided easy transportation. And I like this photograph because it shows the bobtail car with the sign of Woodward's Gardens Direct. So it just is just a wonderful way of bringing people into his gardens. And again, Woodward was very public spirited and he charged very modest fees for people to come in. And he charged 25 cents for adults and also 10 cents for children. But keep in mind, you had a pretty good overhead of trying to maintain the grounds and the restaurants and everything. So he couldn't make everything for free, but he had many special events. And one was to help Civil War veterans too, was free of charge, and raised money for them. And here's another one. Well, let me go back and just say that he again was so public spirited that he wanted everyone to enjoy his gardens. This is going to be music and education available for everyone. So, but he too was besieged with all kinds of offers of things. One, he was offered a two-headed calf, and then he asked him if he wanted to engage a 9-year-old fat girl who weighed 190 pounds. But he respectfully declined these offers, at least the best I can document them. And so anyhow, he just did so well. But as time went on, and he became very, very ill, and he passed away in August 23rd, 1879. He had many severe illnesses, including asthma, rheumatism, and Bright's disease of the kidneys. So this was a tragic loss for San Francisco. He was only 55 at the time. And So here he is. And there was a famous magazine published in San Francisco in the late 19th century called the Illustrated Wasp. And the reason why it was called the Wasp was that it's very satirical and it stung like one. But this was one exception to their rule. I mean, they loved to lampoon politicians and rich people, but they so loved, so respected contributions of Robert Woodward that they devoted this cover to him. And again, requisite in posse. So just it's very rare for this satirical magazine to show such a respectful portrait of Robert Woodward. And so the gardens did continue after his death, and it was run by a number of people, including his brother. And you can see here too that they passed out complimentary tickets. This is a very rare piece of ephemera too. This is issued in 1892, and this was the last year of the gardens. And so the gardens just became too difficult to keep up. And so they decided, the family did, to auction off the contents of Woodward's gardens, which included over 75,000 lots from 4 museums, an art gallery, 3 conservatories, and several living animals and birds. And so this auction did take place, and it just was also too, you know, again, the Golden State Park was developing, so they had a lot of competition too. So it anyhow, this auction was held, and one of the most important bidders there was a man by the name of Adolph Sutro. And he made a lot of money in the Comstock lode in Nevada. And he came back to San Francisco and purchased a lot of the stock of Woodward's Gardens. He, Adolph Sutro himself, built the most ornate cliff house out on the shores, western shores of San Francisco. And he also opened up a beautiful garden there, Sutro's Gardens. But so he was very intent of adding to his collection. Plus, he was a great bibliophile, and the Woodward's Gardens collection of books and some of the papers reside at the Sutro Library, which is a branch of the California State Library, but also like this one too. Adolph Sutro, lively bidder, he used his pencil rather than shouting out his bids. So, and here is Adolph Sutro in his home there in Sutro Heights, and the beautiful book collection in the background. But he also stored most of, sensibly, thank goodness, his books and other materials, artifacts in a place called the Montgomery Block. And it was built out of brick and mortar and marble, so it was essentially fireproof. And it did escape the 1906 earthquake and fire. And way back in the 1870s, it was torn down to make way for the Transamerica Pyramid. But thank goodness for the Montgomery Block, as that saved this marvelous collection of books and ephemera gathered and collected by first R.B. Woodward and then Adolph Sutro. So anyhow, I am going to close up by now with this quote from his granddaughter. He said, well, with the auction and sale of 4 acres, San Francisco and California lost a prized possession. The passion of a single public-spirited man, Robert Bloom Woodward, created an educational and cultural institution that brought joy to untold thousands. Little remains of his legacy, and yet it helped create a San Francisco known for much more than its Barbary coast. And a beautiful touch of nostalgia, his granddaughter, Ethel Brown, wrote, ask any old San Francisco who remembers his 1870s and 1880s just what was Woodward's Gardens, and watch his eye kindle and his tongue loosen. He will probably tell you that it was the most diverting and enchanting spot in the world, and that we have nothing today that can even touch it. So thank you for listening to me and your indulgence in seeing my slideshow. So that is the end of my talk in homage to Robert Bloom Woodward.
Well, that was terrific, Gary. And I will take your admonition and applaud with my hands only. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Yes, it's such a fascinating two presentations today. One obviously East Coast, geared toward luxury homes. The other West Coast and geared toward the public in general. One of the things that I found fascinating was the fact that P.T. Barnum offered his services. And in a way, it's almost as if Mr. Woodward were a more refined P.T. Barnum.
Yes, that's a good way of putting it. Yes.
Yeah, when you look at the things that he offered, a sword fight and diving bears and things of that sort. But then this very elegant museum, a circulating library with these important books. It's almost as if he had, it's not as if, he had this very strong social conscience. And awareness. And you make that very clear.
He's a very public-spirited man. And,
oh, yes, absolutely. So it brings us to one of the first questions, and that is, you mentioned that some of the events could be attended for the price of, I think you said 10 cents and 25 cents. But in general, could the public come in free, or was some kind of entrance fee required?
No, he did charge an entrance fee, but I read in one newspaper account how children often snuck in there and didn't have to pay anything. And but just consider that he had a lot of overhead there. He had staff to pay, gardens to keep up. And so there was a lot of, expenses associated with that. And again, operating a hotel was, he was very wealthy, but not wealthy enough to make it all free of charge. So but he also made it actually free of charge. I'm sorry, I almost forgot to say, to all kinds of charitable groups, and particularly to Civil War veterans. They came there and they had a wonderful event at Woodward Gardens, and he didn't charge anything for it. So again, it was Woodward being a teetotaler, he had a lot of water fountains and drinking fountains throughout the gardens. But occasionally they did allow wine in there. So
oh, good heavens.
Yes.
Well, they must have done it when he was up at his home in Napa Valley.
Napa Valley, yes.
Something of the sort. Well, he sounds as though he was trying to, and you make this clear, trying to elevate the resources that miners had at their disposal. Instead of sitting in a bar and drinking whiskey,
right.
They could be exposed to other diversions in their lives. And I think that's a very noble mission that he had for himself and for others.
Yeah, because as you can imagine, San Francisco also had a few ladies of the evening roaming around there too.
Well, no question.
This is an educational diversion.
Another question is, what is on the site now of what was Woodward Gardens?
Oh, it's a commercial property now. It's, I think some residents, what have you. It's a Wells Fargo bank is on his property, and there's some other commercial aspects to it. And
now, one of the interesting, and this leads to another question from one of our viewers. You talked about the fact of competition arising when Golden Gate Park was built, which I think was a few years after Woodward opened his gardens. And
that was 1868 that Golden Gate Park.
Golden Gate, okay. And picking up on what we learned earlier about the Dakota, did the gardens become something of a standard by which other parks were created? In other words, did it influence the creation of other parks?
Yeah, I believe so. There are other parks around San Francisco too, places like Rusk Gardens and what have you, not only Golden Gate Park, but yes, he did have a cultural impact on San Francisco. And so again, such a public spirited man that, he wanted everyone to, get an educational experience as well as being, entertained at the same time. So, I had orchestras there and, all kinds of different diversions too. So it,
Yeah. Well, I wonder too, in your sense of things, and I know Golden State Park, or Golden Gate Park rather, is a huge tract of land. So just in sheer size, but what is your sense of what may have attracted people more to Golden Gate and away from Mr. Woodward's garden?
Well, I think the extent of Golden Gate Park, it was a huge, I forget how many acres it was, but it was probably 10 times the size of Woodward's Gardens, and started to offer some of the same sorts of things as aquariums and that sort of thing too. So in a museum there, and there's a wonderful museum, the DeYoung Museum. So it gradually evolved, and so there was competition. Plus, the location of Woodward's Gardens was in a very important financial district of San Francisco. So whereas Golden Gate Park was way out in kind of the hinterlands of the city at the time. So the real estate there at Woodward's Gardens was so valuable that, that became the reality of the situation. And so we were kind of mentioning earlier too, the real estate in San Francisco still, is extraordinarily high. When I lived there trying to find a 1-bedroom apartment that, is very, very expensive. And just,
well, and it seems too that, he was still managing a hotel. I'm assuming he was visiting his family from time to time in Napa Valley.
Yes.
I don't think he was, one of our viewers wondered, was he managing the gardens from Napa? I don't know, was he doing that or was he more hands-on?
Yeah, no, he was, well, both, but he did have his brother worked at the gardens, and also another guy by the name of Gruber also was very much in charge there. But Woodward went back and forth, but it's not an easy commute over from San Francisco at that time over to the Napa Valley.
And the other thing too that, and this ties in with the early part of your career working with at the Huntington, and that is, one person wonders if Woodward's garden might have had something of an influence on the Huntington, because I think of the wonderful Japanese garden, and I think of the wonderful garden with cacti. And of course, they house one of the great collections in the world of books and ephemera. Do you think there was something of a carryover there?
I haven't been able to find documentation on that. And I've gone through a lot of biographical material on Henry E. Huntington, the founder of that. And I haven't been able to substantiate that Woodward influenced him, but I would have no doubt that he did influence Huntington, because the variety of things that are at the Huntington Library and Gardens, makes it like a giant Woodward's Gardens. It really is.
Yeah.
Not only the library but the art gallery there, and just the beautiful fountains scattered around the gardens there. It's one of the great places to visit. So
it really is. And I've had, a number of, you had the great good fortune of working there. I've only had the good fortune to visit a number of times, but I couldn't help seeing a connection between what Woodward did and what Henry Huntington did with his property. I suspect two different motivations there, but influence, nonetheless, just like the Dakota influenced subsequent apartment structures in New York. Another question.
That's an astute observation.
I'm sorry?
That's an astute observation.
Well, thank you. Another viewer wonders if I wish to learn more about Woodward's Garden. Is there a resource I can go to? And is there a book? Is there a monograph? What more can I read to learn about the garden?
Yeah, I did an extensive article for the San Francisco Historical Society. I should hold this up in their magazine called the Argonaut. And this was published in this summer of last year, 2021. And the San Francisco Historical Society is a wonderful organization, and they published much of what I talked about today. So and again, the Sutro Library, which is founded by Adolf Sutro, but it's part of the state library system. It's way over on the campus now of San Francisco State University, but it again has a lot of materials from Woodward's Gardens. Plus all those books.
And thanks to Adolf Sutro for constructing a building to preserve it.
Yes.
That's a story in itself, it would seem to me.
Yes.
Well, and I would hope that you would share with us maybe an email to the Ephemera Society, the citation for the Argonaut, so that we can share this with our viewing audience as well.
Yes.
Well, we've come to the end of your presentation and of the day, and I will close by saying that, like Andrew, we have someone here who said, "I never knew this existed. Collecting the material must have been exciting." And I did not know about Woodward's Garden. I have not been in San Francisco. Well, I was there recently, but the next time I'm in the area, I'll certainly wave to the plaque. And as our final comment here from our viewership has mentioned, you can't see me, but I'm clapping in the background. So thank you very much, Gary.
My honor and pleasure, Mike. Thank you so much.
Gary, I also just want to thank you. I want to thank Andrew. That's a wrap for today's conference preview. But just like the word says, it's a preview. Our full in-person conference and fair will be held in Greenwich, Connecticut on March 18th. We're going to go ahead with the traditional physical fair, understanding that some will be nervous about what March has to offer us. But let me reassure you, the Ephemera Society board has recently voted to institute a full vaccine and face mask mandate for all attendees. We want everyone to be safe. So go to the ephemerasociety.org, sign up,